Welcome to this session as part of the Gulf Studies Forum in its 11th annual iteration. The second theme in this forum is the Gulf City and nation building. The Gulf City as a structure and social agent. The speakers today are Dr. Ulrike Freitag, العنود الخليفة, and Mr. Rufaili. And before I introduce them, I would like to point out that this topic is vital and important, and we thank this center for discussing it. By coincidence, 2 days ago, I was in Riyadh attending a symposium about the architectural identity of Saudi Arabia. And two specialized professors specialized in architecture talked, and they discussed the architectural situation in the kingdom and its development and its various nuances and challenges. And this is actually the subject, the challenges of the identity. It is something that we have discussed in the region due to obvious reason, because there are concerns about the identity, about who we are, what is our affiliation, and what should the situation be at various levels. In the symposium that I am indicating, there was semi-agreement that cities in the Gulf region have become like an architectural laboratory for many trends and many proposals, where architects are competing to highlight their perspectives, and that identity is not a static issue. It is the nuance. There is a variety in identity. Is it changing or is it fixed? In my opinion, it is ever changing. However, is this change rapid? Is it does it not have any traits? There are people who believe that it is a heritage identity, and in architecture there is a trend to restore the traditional trait in architecture. But there are people who say that it is an ever-changing identity and needs to adapt to the various changes and developments that result from interaction with other cultures, and so it should embrace everything new and stay away from classic static situation. So some cities more than others manifest this situation of variety. There is the parts related to the legacy, and there are other traits that show that the identity is Arab, Islamic, local, and we need to preserve it. And there are people who believe that urban expansion needs to reflect on the various components of the civil society, and the same discussion applies to other themes and sectors. I am not discussing this right now in detail. However, I wanted to present it from a perspective that could intersect with the theme that our speakers will discuss today. However, we will be presented with rich insights, valuable speakers in this session. First, we have Dr. Ulrike Freitag. She is a historian and specialized in modern Middle East, director of the Leibniz Middle Eastern Studies, Modern Middle Eastern Studies in Berlin. She is a professor in the Free University of Berlin since 2002. She has worked on historiography in Syria, Hadrami migration in the Indian Ocean, and the urban history of Jeddah. Her research focuses on the modern history of Muslim societies from a translocal perspective, forms and spaces of participation in Arab societies, and modern cultural and urban history of the Arabian Peninsula. Her publications include Indian Ocean Migrants and State Formation in Hadramaut, 2003, and History of Jeddah, the Gate to Mecca in the 19th and 20th centuries, 2022. I expect my colleagues here to abide by the time allotted to them. 15 to 20 minutes, please. That is the time allotted to each. And after listening to these research papers, we will open the floor for Q&A. Go ahead, please, Dr. Freitag.
This paper on cities as nodes of identity reflects on the theme with a special reference to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which has to do with what I've been working on myself. And I find that in the context of the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia differs a little bit from the smaller Gulf countries because it has many different types of urbanization. And I think it differs to some extent from Oman and Yemen because these two countries have, until now at least, refrained from the giga and mega projects which characterize the current development in Saudi Arabia. I should point out from the beginning that my starting point is the city of Jeddah because that's where I have worked. My comments on other cities as well as my comments on the future cities are very much based on occasional observations, conversations with various people, etc. And so they're much more a suggestion for common discussion than any definite academic findings. And I also should point out that, of course, I'm talking from a European point of view. And I know that we sometimes look at things a bit differently than people in the Gulf. So just to make that sure from the beginning. I would argue that one can at least distinguish three different types of cities in what constitutes present-day Saudi Arabia. The old cities such as Mecca, Jeddah, which you can see on the slide, and of course Medina and many other older cities. You can see the oil cities, which were created in the context of the development of oil industrialization. And then, of course, now everybody talks about the future cities, such as The Line, as Muqab in Riyadh, and others. As for the oil cities, of course, Dammam and the oil conurbations on the Gulf Coast, as well as the oil industrial cities of Al Jubail and Yanbu al-Bahar, both established in 1975, are prime examples, although oil industrialization has, of course, impacted also on cities such as Riyadh or Jeddah. The main difference between these different types of cities is the way in which they developed, which has consequences for the composition of the population and for the ways in which people relate to one another, relate to the city, and relate, and I think this is important, to the state. I mean, the question of Hawiyya was mentioned. In a very simplified and schematic manner, one could argue that inhabitants of the old cities, which had much time to grow organically, developed a sense of internal cohesion and local identity, also very much based on a joint history, which also in the Hijaz at least managed to integrate many newcomers. The oil and industrial cities were actually based on newcomers both from Saudi Arabia as well as from other countries. And finally, the future cities have an international appeal, or so I would argue, to a cosmopolitan hyper-modernism. Thus, while in present-day Saudi Arabia, all cities are characterized by populations which come from different parts of the kingdom, as well as from abroad, after all, 41% of the population are foreigners, the perception of the different cities among Saudi nationals differs significantly. So my discussion will set out to discuss identity formation in the port city of Jeddah, with occasional allusions to other cities, and then move on to discuss the oil and future cities. Now, to start with the traditional cities, they were very much, life there was very much structured by the rhythm of religion, and social relations revolved around family and neighborhood. The description of the bonds in local historiography, the Tawarikh al-Mahaliya, but also the Mudhakirat, for example, focus on a range of social practices commonly referred to as adat wa taqalid. And these texts usually also comprise chapters on religious practices or at times the organization of labor in the old cities. Now, I don't need, I think, in this context to discuss these interactions. They comprise the life cycle celebrations in the Hijaz. They're also very much centered around the religious year, and in particular the pilgrimage, which constituted a peak not only of religious life, but of course also of economic activity and celebration. In general, it's important to note the importance of the neighborhoods, which also offered spaces of social interaction, such as the coffee shops, which you can see here, or the squares. This is not a traditional square, it's a modern square because the house was demolished or fell down, but these squares also traditionally offered space not just for meetings, but also for sports by the youth. And I'm showing the right picture because the rawashin, these wooden screens like the mashrabiyat in Egypt, offered actually sound to penetrate the houses so that women, although meeting in the shelter of their homes for their social activities, actually could very much, at least passively, participate in what was happening in the public spaces. And of course, dress, dialect, music, and many other features are also part of these local identities. These interactions created strong bonds among the inhabitants of the old city of Jeddah and equally in Mecca, Medina, etc. And as a result of trade and pilgrimage, Hijazi society at least absorbed also many newcomers and turned them rather quickly, within a generation or two, into Hijazis, something which was a bit more complicated in the traditional cities of the Najd. In many ways, this is continuing to these kind of processes are continuing or have continued until rather recently. Now, from the 1950s onwards, Jeddah, but also Riyadh, changed first slowly and then ever more quickly as families started to move out of the old city because there was more demand for space, but also for modern amenities, starting from water and electricity to the accessibility of the houses by cars and many other amenities. Plus, of course, there was a growing influx of labor from the countryside. Just to give you a few figures, between 1974 and 84, the area of Jeddah multiplied 49 times. And by the 1960s, 85% of the household heads of Riyadh were estimated to have been born outside of the city. So you can see this rapid transformation of the city, which of course impacted very much. Al-Mubarak, who has characterized oil urbanization in Saudi Arabia, discusses the planning which went along with this rapid expansion of the cities, and he argues that this planning was meant to convey the central authorities' efforts toward modernization. In other words, the state now came into the city in a much more prominent manner. In the new suburbs, families began establishing residences for nuclear families rather than residing in multi-generational homes, as had been the case in the old city. Both families as well as neighborhood networks began to become dispersed across the ever-growing distances of these rapidly expanding cities. Only a relatively small number of families established family compounds, such as you can see here, with perhaps a main house and then bungalows or villas for other family members. And you find quite a number of these family compounds in the city of Jeddah behind high walls, so you don't necessarily actually realize what is behind there. The more typical form was, however, the villa with very high walls around it and small or shaded windows. So a kind of adaptation of a Western style adapted to local customs, but also adapted in between the late 1970s and 1990s in particular to the growing importance of a politically inflected type of Islam. That, together with the absence of public transport, so the predominance of individual transport, and the absence of clubs or other social activities, significantly changed the social fabric. Again, this is a slow process which has been characterized by sociologist Sathan, writing in 2012, as a loss, or at least a serious diminution, of social links among and beyond family members. The urban expansion also resulted in a clear differentiation between relatively affluent and relatively poor neighborhoods, characterized by the size of the houses, or in the poor neighborhoods also in apartment houses. And the sort of famous apartment houses we see now along the Corniche of Jeddah, where very rich people live, are actually a very modern phenomenon. Until very recently, people preferred to have individual houses. It is important, of course, to stress that in Saudi Arabia, in contrast to many of the smaller Gulf countries, poorer neighborhoods were not only inhabited by foreigners, by non-nationals, because there was such a large influx from the countryside. And this influx, of course, impacted on the urban identities. Pascal Menoret, talking about Riyadh, has demonstrated how youth in the new poor neighborhoods enacted their own panoptic vision of the city, which ran counter to mainstream normative society and public order. And he talks about the use of cars and the games played with cars by the youth. People, of course, have tried to stem this trend of alienation, of the loosening of social trends. Many families have established regular weekly meetings. There are regular social visits, of course, and there are, of course, celebrations such as weddings and perhaps even more important visits of condolences, which very much also still revive the older links, not just within the family circle, but beyond. The interesting thing is that in the written accounts, which have started to be published mostly after the old city had been left, there are increasingly lists of people who used to live in the traditional city. And these lists are used by local families to identify who belongs and who doesn't belong, which of course excludes everybody who arrived in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, no matter whether Saudi or not. And there was, until recently at least, another trend in Jeddah that some of the older families actually went back to their old houses in the city, which still belonged to them, but which had been abandoned, renovated them, and started to use them in some cases also as spaces for the family gatherings, thereby to mark their belonging to the old city. Of course, with this becoming World Heritage and being expropriated, things had to change. Of course, there are also clear limitations to this kind of urban identity, which I think we have to recognize. It is very much a backward-oriented identity. It stops somewhere belongings, or those who can belong, stops somewhere between the late 1940s and the 1960s, or perhaps 70s. And it's also a kind of closed vision of belonging. Now let me move on to the oil towns and oil urbanization. There, as I mentioned earlier, everybody was, in a sense, a new resident. Let me just give you an impression of these new cities. kind of started off from labor camps, which had been distinguished very clearly in terms of social class and occupation, but then also these completely new cities such as Al-Khobar were developed with a new style of building which did not take into consideration traditional building forms or the needs for privacy. As you can see here, rather large windows, balconies, which in Saudi society were not necessarily used very much. And in many ways, the extensions also of the traditional cities look very much like these new oil conurbations. Traditional authorities and local administration were to a large extent replaced by a more hierarchical, technocratic notion of service provision. Now, what does this mean for identity formation? And here I'm starting to get onto really difficult territory because there hasn't been that much research on this. My thesis would be that actually in these new cities, beyond obviously references to the places of origin, which everybody has, or the lineages of origin, there is much more of an identification with the new city, but also with the state. And if one looks at mudakkirat of people who were socialized, born in the 30s, 40s, and then socialized into this new world and who became technocrats, you can see very much how they describe, this is just the kind of layout in these new cities, you can see very much how they identify with the building of the new Saudi state. And that plays a much bigger role than the city in the mudakkirat of those people who really still hailed from the very traditional cities. Let me finally move to the futuristic cities, and here I'm on even more shaky territory. The Saudi Vision 2030 announced a large number of innovative and impressive new cities, first and foremost, of course, Neom, with its signature component, the line. According to the advertisements, which you can all find online and which I know you all know, the line promises to revolutionize urbanism through its compact design, which offers a safe, walkable, and green environment with all imaginable amenities, which creates a zero-carbon city and offers international connectivity. Projects like NEOM, as well as the new center of Riyadh, the new Murabba, and Jeddah Central conform to what Andrew Gardner has very aptly discussed with regard to other cities, basing his own analysis on David Harvey's observations regarding the relationship between capital, urbanization, and social relations. Gardner highlights the importance of spectacular cities to attract capital surplus, nationally as well as internationally. NEOM's promise to use world-renowned architects both heightens the attraction of investment and the international appeal of the project. The promise of an empty place is one of the attractions to urbanists and enables the top-down creation of a new city. And this is meant to enable a new way of living, which allows the kind of social engineering about which many architects have themselves dreamt about since proper or modern urban planning began. And we can look at Brasilia, we can look at many cities around the world where architects were trying to realize this dream of imagining a new kind of sociability. The Bauhaus in Germany would be another such example. Such planning involves the physical separation, not just of different functions, but also, that is more my concern here, of social class and origin. If one looks at the designs for the new heart of Jeddah, or for the designs published by the company Rushen, which is charged with developing many of the new urban projects in Saudi Arabia, you can see that there is the promise of aspirational living, replete with beautifully designed homes, complemented by mosques, retail, parks, schools, leisure, and entertainment. And I think the image of the new heart of Jeddah shows you the kind of living imagined there. It is clear that neither these spaces, nor indeed the entirety of NEOM, foresee any space for the less affluent parts of society. And that, for me, as a European is a bit of a problem. To whom do such projects appeal? There is the obvious aspect of international branding, and again, that has been discussed quite a lot. NEOM has become known far beyond the Middle East, and it is the power of the until now mostly speculative, which works and interests internationally. And I mean, talking to my son, who knows nothing about Saudi Arabia, he actually knows about NEOM, and he's very excited because it's something he has never thought of about before. And so it appears that this is not just appealing to affluent Saudis and international investors, but also to affluent digital nomads and tourists. Hence also, I think, the stress in the advertisements of NEOM of the international air connection, 6 hours to many parts of the world. There's a promotional film which shows this. Even without an analysis of social media, which I'm not doing, it is obvious that in a country which until now was considered to be exceedingly boring, not just outside of Saudi Arabia, but also to many of the younger generation, these new visions promise much desired, exciting prospects. The sheer scale of many of the projects contains the promise that Saudi Arabia might leapfrog developments in many other countries, and I think also among them the Western countries, and I understand from my Saudi friends that there's also some kind of pride that, many Westerners actually tend to not know very much about the region and tend to perhaps also look down on it. You can actually see so much activity and so much investment and so very modern and unheard of developments. So there's a lot to be said about the contribution to national pride from at least what I understand. Whether that would, in the long term, also foster the kind of localized pride and sense of identity as the old cities is, of course, very difficult to predict. So whose city, whose identity? And with this, I come to my conclusion. The question arises, who identifies with which types of city and whose views and interests fall by the wayside? For Dubai, Neha Vora has argued convincingly that non-citizen labor, and in particular the large Indian community which she had investigated, are a constitutive part of defining the nation state, and more pertinent to the question at hand, also stake their claims in the cities in which they live. The NEOM answer to the presence of menial labor can be glanced from the promotional material. NEOM promises very many automated services, not just autonomous vehicles, but also robots, which are meant to perform much of the menial labor. So immigrant labor would no longer be required, and therefore the question falls by the wayside. In contrast, foreigners of middle and upper class would, of course, easily fit into such a model. As pointed out above, however, Saudi Arabia has a much larger percentage of nationals than the smaller, of poor nationals than the smaller Gulf countries. And in addition, Saudi Arabia is also home to people who never really bothered to apply for nationality until it was too late and nationality was no longer easily available. At least in the Hijaz, this is a serious issue. Thus, time's over?
Yeah.
No, could you just
finish the sentence?
Yeah. Okay, so basically, I hope you've understood that my main question would be who would be left out of these new developments, and perhaps we have something to discuss afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
In the name of Allah and peace be upon His noble messenger, on the onset, I would like to welcome you, and I'm immensely pleased by being with you and to introduce my paper that will. And the title is Memory, Trauma, and the Political Identity of the City. Dar'iyah is an example. It is an important issue to identify, to try to understand the building the political identity in the Gulf countries. In my presentation in this paper, I will focus on the role of Dar'iyah as an open museum that reflects change in the political narratives and re-identify the identity of the city, and also it plays a role in enhancing the modern narrative, political narrative. I will try to focus on a number of very important themes that will incite discussion. So I will not speak about the theoretical aspects and the methodologies I have used in this paper. However, before I indulge in the discussion of the paper, I think it's very important to go over a number of approaches, especially when it comes to the studies of the Gulf cities and the role of the museum in identifying the national identity. Gulf countries in many research and the Orientalism, they are looked at as a homogeneous uh, countries, despite the differences. However, such approach ignore the differences which manifest in the social structures and political. Although there are many common factors like the traditions, the rapid economic growth because of the oil. However, this does not reflect the national identity or the structure. So generalization would lead to ignoring the specificities which identify the growth of the identity of each country. National museums play a vital and important role, and Gulf countries, for each Gulf, they have their own strategies and tools to develop its national narrative, which differs from one country to another. And we will see that in Saudi Arabia, there is a transformation in the nature and types of museums. However, as I said, national museums play a vital role in creating the national narratives, which serves the objectives. There are centralized mechanisms that focuses on the museum narratives that's related to the political approach, which is very much linked to the social transformations and the overall objectives of the countries. So it is very important to give you some examples of the National Museum's narratives so as to understand the differences between these dynamics. For instance, if we start with Bahrain National Museum, we would see that its narrative focuses more on the past eras. Focusing primarily on the Delmon civilization, which preceded the national creation of the country, and it linked this transformation with the so an extent. So the museum looks at the country as an abstract political that also this museum focuses on a managetive historical unit based on history, culture, and focuses mainly, as I said, on the ancient civilizations. On the other hand, Qatar National Museum focuses on the new narrative and does not focus on the tradition. This museum, National Museum, presents multifaceted national narratives that beyond the national traditional identity, so as to promote more comprehensive identity. And this consolidates the unity and the loyalty due to the fast and rapid transformations. Also, this narrative promotes the Qatar vision as an open country that encompasses and embraces all cultures, and also focuses on the achievements of the state of Qatar and the image of Qatar at the national landscape. Also, so it presents a dynamic national identity that balances between the tradition as its futuristic approach, take into account the soft power that distinguishes the state of Qatar. So we have seen transformation and changes in the museums and their narratives. And the Saudi national presents a very complex and complicated narrative that take advantage of religion and history. And this narrative focuses on the pre-Islam eras, and this gives a long and continued chronological approach. So this highlights the role or the kingdom as the country that embraces the two holy mosques, and this highlights its leading role in the Islamic world. Also, this narrative focuses on the role of the late King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz as the father of the new modernization, and this highlights the emergence of history and religious. So this narrative focuses mainly on linking and merging the national identity with the religious identity. However, in the recent years, we have seen huge transformation, starting from the mid 2016 and with the launching of Saudi Vision 2030. The kingdom have moved to a strategic changes due to the rapid changes and the international influences. These transformations have been manifested in the changes at the social, economic, religious levels, which requires the recreation of a new narratives to highlight the political meaning and the social cohesion. So the political elites in Saudi Arabia have developed totally new narrative that is based on a narrative that has been designed and that links the past to the future. This narrative took into account the Adraya, the historical cities that is also known as Al Oja in a strategic manner as a historical and cultural simple that would help in achieving the goals. Adraya was the first capital and the cradle of the new Saudi Arabia. It is a model starting point. It is not a historical place, but rather it was the origin of the unified political structure. It is very linked also with the blockade, At-Taif blockade in the 18th century. So the Dar'iyya is a model to highlights what's so called the primitive unity. This model further consolidate these roots on identity and linking historical events that could incite the national feelings. In the context of Vision 2030, this symbolism have been recreated through a huge project that focuses on developing the gate of Adar'iyya and to make Adar'iyya area as an open museum. At-Taif neighborhood is one of the main neighborhoods that encompasses a number of historical places, palaces that goes back to the first Saudi kingdom. This neighborhood encompasses 6 specialized museums, Dar'iyya Salwa Social, the Arabian horses, the war museum, trade, and the also this neighborhood have a number of historical palaces like Salwa Palace and Thayyan bin Saud. And this Atrif neighborhood also have a number of interactive presentations that further consolidate the idea of open museum. So this provides a dynamic platform to reutilize these among these presentations the light and sound on the walls of Salwa Palace. Also, this presentation highlights the historical importance of the first Saudi kingdom. These historical events are being frozen to allow audience to contemplate on the importance of these historical eras. Also, it gives importance to the Salwa Palace and linked it to the religious and historical backgrounds. There are other five presentations that complement the major presentations and which provide fragmented but at the same time a coherent narrative. In addition to these presentations, the six museums in At-Raif neighborhood also helps in documenting the history of Saudi Arabia and present different manifestations of life like war, family rule. This is complemented by other events which restructure the history in a new approach, and it allows it links between the visual narrative and which helps in the recreations of the past in a manner that is suitable to the new generations. The different narratives in Ad-Dar'iyya focuses on three primary transformations in identity and the nature of the museum. I will speak firstly on the trauma memory, the memory of trauma. When identifying the narratives of Ad-Dar'iyya, we find out that there has been the blockade or the siege in 1818, like as not as separate military action, but rather a fundamental start for the establishment of the of Saudi Arabia. So the first kingdom has faced an existential challenge, and this later on it was utilized, and it reflects the identity between the nation and it is national status. So Ad-Dar'iyya just highlights this point. The siege narrative presents different models, different from what the historical documents, which focuses on so this narrative, this new narrative in Ad-Dar'iyya shows that the major crises like sieges can be changed to become symbols to bring people together on as Anderson said, these fundamental events helped in establishing a new identity. And in Ad-Dar'iyya, this siege has been presented as an existential threat to the first Saudi kingdom. So Ad-Dar'iyya and its new experience provide a comprehensive traumatic way to present the Saudi history. So this approach put the political narrative in the midst of these experiences, and it adopts a model that focuses on the creating a trauma or a shock that would help in establishing the identity. The second, the transformation from the religious narrative to the political narrative. So it shows that religion is not the primary factor in establishing the identity. There were other narratives that reflects fundamental change in understanding the Saudi identity. No longer the religious aspect is the primary factor behind this identity. There are different narratives that helps in establishing a new identity, and this shows a change between the country and its identity. No longer the religion remains as I said, the main factor in building the political relation. And Ad-Dar'iyya reflects this change. Ad-Dar'iyya did not rely on religion and presented a political narrative that focuses on the historical role of Al Saud in creating the country. So Ad-Dar'iyya uh, have a new approach that reflects the emergence of political and social activities. Ad-Dar'iyya provides a futuristic vision of the country. At the same time, it provides a materialistic memory. This reflects a new approach to that focuses on the nation state, far from the Islamic identity. This change in the historical narrative reflects uh, a new idea about the establishment of the country. In 1744, with the alliance between Muhammad bin Saud and Muhammad bin Wahab, were fundamental in creating the first kingdom. However, now the focus on 1927, the date of the establishment of the new Saudi kingdom, and highlights the political and military role of Mohammed bin Salman and minimize the role of religions in establishing the kingdom. This transformation present a qualitative change that focuses on the leadership of Mohammed bin Saud as the main engine behind the establishment of the kingdom. Also, so the national identity is being restructured based on political uh, and economic foundations without ignoring other factors. The third transformation is in the nature of the museum. Ad-Dar'iyya present a unique approach. The historical city is being considered as an open museum, which is different from the different museums in different Gulf countries. In Ad-Dar'iyya, the old is re-emerged with the future identity of this, and this city helps in reformation of the national identity, which is aligned with the Vision 2030. So the identity of the museum in the Saudi Arabia is not mainly established based on religious, but we are seeing a new transformation and new forms of museums that focuses on the social, political, and economic factors, which helped in creating the country. So the cultural, economic, and political identity became instrumental in creating this new identity. So recreating the role of Ad-Dar'iyya as an open museum constitute a different approach in the restructuring so Ad-Dar'iyya through this simple it became a center that re-identify the link between the past and the future, and this reflects a change in the political and cultural functions of Ad-Dar'iyya. So it became a part of the project to rebuild this nation, and going back to the siege, which was fundamental in the history of Saudi Arabia. But however, it need to be approached from a different angle that would further consolidate this narrative. So the collective memory in Ad-Dar'iyya is being utilized to further consolidate the country legitimacy, and Ad-Dar'iyya now it is a tool to build a political discourse that reflects the history of the country and also present a new discourse that takes into account the future aims and objectives of the country. This will put Saudi Arabia as a fundamental country on the national, international landscape. Unfortunately, Dr. Saad is reminding me of the time, so I will stop here and thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Anoud. You have actually adhered to the time allotted to you. The next speaker is Mr. Rufaili. He is a master's student at the Department of Arabic Language and Culture in the Beijing University, China. He studies the contemporary Middle East with a special focus on the social and economic transitions of the Gulf states. His research interests also cover the nuclear proliferation in the Middle East and North Africa. He authored Saudi Arabia's space program, Evolution, Drivers and Approaches, published by the Middle East Institute of the National University of Singapore in 2024, this year. So Mr. Lee will talk about the role of urban transformation in Saudi nation building, the case of Al-Balad Jeddah. Welcome. Please start. Thank you very much, Dr. Saad. Dear attendees, ladies and gentlemen, peace and God's blessings be upon you. My name is in Arabic. My name in Arabic is Said, and I am right now a master's student in the Arabic section in the University of Beijing. I apologize because I will start speaking in English or Arabic about the role of urban transformation, Saudi Arabia's nation building.
And then with the main body, it will be around a historical account of the Jeddawi identity, and then regarding the conservation efforts by the Saudi government on protecting Al-Balad through the 1960s all the way down to the present time. And the turn to heritage, which started roughly during the reign of King Abdullah, which is inherited by the Malik Salman and Mohammed bin Salman. And in the very foremost of my presentation, I owe much of my research to, based on the basis of research and presentation of Professor Freitag and Dr. Al-Anoud and their studies. So a brief historical overview of the historical development of Jeddah will reveal that it developed through Ottoman or Mamluk Ottoman period all the way down to the present time, which can be divided mainly into 4 phases. And a sketchy division here indicates some of the prominent features. And if we focus on the last 3 phases, is the political heart of Hijaz and a commercial hub and the gateway to Mecca to the commercial hub of Saudi Arabia in the early 20th century. And in 1960s all the way to 1980s, we can witness under the reign of King Faisal, Fahad, and Khalid, the rapid modernization, which the city had witnessed a boom in regarding the space and its population, while top-down projects are conducted within Al-Balad and Jeddah at large. And starting in the 2000s, we can see the state transformation agenda and the new wave of nation building in which the historic Jeddah come to play a part again. And it should be noticed that it can be argued that the urban transformation has a reinforced role in the present stage in the nation building of Saudi Arabia, while the latter as a process is also relatively new process compared to what is done regarding the state building of Saudi Arabia, which we are mainly talking about the expansion of state apparatus, its economic capability, its administration, which is largely completed between the period in 1960s all the way to 1980s. And then, regarding the research questions, of course, the first question would be regarding al-Balad per se, which is the physical and social transformation of al-Balad in modern times. And therefore, we'll be mainly focusing on the transformation which is done with the advent of Saudi rule all over the Arabian Peninsula. And the second question would be how the new revitalization projects, مشروع إعادة الإحياء, differ from the previous ones, especially given the project's new emphasis on al-Balad's significance as an integral part of Saudi's national heritage, Turath Watani. And therefore, I take al-Balad as a case study, of course, because it falls into the category of what Professor Faitak has just mentioned as an old city of not only Saudi Arabia, but also in the Arabian Peninsula. And of course, 2 field trips were conducted, and I'll be mainly using photos covered in this, which I personally took during 2 field trips taken this year in January and in July. And the diachronic arrangement is applied to my study, covering mainly the pre-1960 period, 1960s to 2000s and 2005 until present time. And so the first thing is regarding the Jiddawi identity and the inter-regional dynamics in the making, which I'll be providing a historical account regarding the dynamic after the advent of Saudi rule in this region. So in history, Jeddah has been long regarded as the dihliz or dahliz of Mecca, which we can say is a gateway to Mecca. And it has this prominent feature because it is a harbor city and it's the main stop for the annual Hajj for their entrance into the holy city. And of course, there is coming with the Jeddah Ghayr, which is also being used as a slogan for modern Jiddawis into describing that Jeddah is different, or to say that Jeddah has its own cultural sophistication and its own heritage, which as an old city with historical linkages. And I listed some of the architectural features here. On the top right, you can see that's picture, the sketch of Raushan or Rawashin in Jeddah. And the design, which I quote from, which is quoted in the thesis I quote, is the Beit Nasif, which is currently stand at the center of historic Jeddah. And in this regard, we should view al-Balad, which is the historical core of Jeddah, as a conglomerate or a mix of the actual built environment, which mainly covers the material part, which is largely completed before the advent of Saudi reign in this area, and the Jeddawi community, which is largely symbolic. And it mainly consists of the rituals, the traditions, adat, taqalid, and of course the practitioners, mainly the original dwellers in this old city. And of course, there comes the changing interregional dynamics, which serve as one of the most important background for the current status of Balad, which is the advent of Saudi rule. And for King Abdulaziz at his time, Jeddah is commercially important and economically important, while it is not culturally important. And there is yet to be a scheme to assimilate Jeddah into the, let's say, the new territory or the new community of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And this is largely overlooked, mainly out of the reason for the own sophistication of the Jeddawi identity and their cultures. And of course, we can also talk about the Hijazi cultures, which is also viewed as more sophisticated compared with what was then the Najdi culture, which is the main culture for perhaps the Saudi rulers. So then we also comes to the changing regional dynamics with Riyadh and Najdi middle class gaining weight within the new Saudi state in the 1940s, 1950s, all the way to 1960s, also as oil turning to become the main source of income instead of the annual pilgrimage income. While annual pilgrimage income once accounted for over 60% of Saudi state financial income in the 1930s, this is no longer the case by the time after the Second World War all the way into 1950s. And then here we come to protecting the al-Balad. And the prelude, or the main context for protection, or the generation for the need of protection, is actually implied by a deterioration in the physical status and the status of the community of al-Balad in this rapid modernization of Saudi Arabia, starting mainly in the 1960s. And as can be viewed here in the three maps, it's Jeddah or al-Balad in 1984 all the way to 1960. And the place which I circled, the right circle, which means the part in the east and close to Bab al-Mecca, is a new residential quarter that has mainly damaged the original urban fabric, while the left circle, which stands as a main commercial area, has its damaging effect to al-Balad, which is built in 1960s and 1970s, which was used to serve the annual Hajj. And it has large markets, and it's separated, which is not quite clear on the PowerPoint, by the Sharia Dhahab, which was built to separate the entire historic area completely into a western part and the eastern part. And of course, in the time of Malik Faisal, his main goal is to reach modernization for the state by using oil revenue and to create new administration departments and to expand the state's capacity in managing its oil income and to implement or to utilize these income in various sectors. And by the time when it comes to the 1970s, under the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, the Saudi government recognized that there is a need to conserve the historical site, as the title suggests. And there comes the RMJM master plan, which is the sole plan for conserving al-Balad in the 20th century. However, its underlying logic, as I argue, is out of the economic logic compared to what is now a prevailing logic perhaps for historical sites conservation, is to preserve the historical sites without further human interventions or human intrusions. And the underlying logic, why is it economic? So I call it economic mainly out of the actual plan implemented. As can be seen, there are four main areas, while the areas that are recognized as needed to be protected is area 3, which is not quite clear. My apologies. You can, it's from the left to the right, the third one. The left two areas are recognized as need for the need for human activities or intensive commercial activities in these two areas are recognized, acknowledged, and preserved. While the commercial activities in these two areas are largely have a damaging effect to al-Balad's urban fabric in this period. While it joined force with the social dynamic, the local communities came to be deprived, as Professor Faitak has just mentioned. The local residents, the local Jeddawis, moved out of al-Balad mainly for larger space and for new amenities, perhaps the northern part of Jeddah or perhaps out of Jeddah directly, and it joined force with the influx of expatriates, which in fact created a slum area, which some scholar terms, in the 1970s to the 1980s within al-Balad. And while the physical situation of al-Balad remains largely unchanged, as the sketch suggests, we can see the road is unpaved, we can see the cars driven by horses, which is carrying a water tank to provide water to family households. It is under this context also that without the practitioners of symbolic values, that the al-Balad was deprived of its a large part of its symbolic values in terms of the local, the indigenous culture, and the al-Balad's characteristics or its specialty is then reduced to, for let's say, architectural features like rawashin, like their Beit Nasif, like the characteristics of architectural designs. And then comes the turn to material history, which is generally in line with the global trend, with the focus on cultural transition, on cultural tourism in the new millennium. Of course, with the new extra layer of forming a national brand in Saudi Arabia. So in 2006, King Abdullah approved the nomination of historic Jeddah for inscription in the World Heritage List. However, it was later rejected or turned down by UNESCO due to the deterioration or the poor circumstances of al-Balad at that time. While in comparison or in contrast, the Dir'iyya, or at that time Traif, was nominated by the Saudi government in 2009 and successfully inscribed in the following year into the World Heritage List, which actually demonstrate a dynamic within the kingdom regarding, let's say, the nation building process, regarding the centrality of the Saudi rulers, or as will be observed below. So the new wave of transformation is intensified or accelerated with the new inscription of historic Jeddah in the World Heritage List in 2014, and then comes the transformation plan, Ru'ya 2030. And it's still a top-down design, with two major projects, Jeddah Historic District Program and the Historic Jeddah Revitalization Project, which is under the direction of Ministry of Culture. Actually, the scaffold here, the green cover here, it all contains the markers of Ministry of Culture. And there comes, again, the symbolic engineering for the new Saudi nationalism, which plays a high emphasis on, let's say, the collective memories. So regarding the lack or the hollowing out of the original, let's say, Hijazi culture and the Hijazi symbols, which is practiced by Jiddawis or Hijaziins, then there comes the centrality of aesthetic symbols or architectural symbols. As we can see in the pictures to the right, it's a small workshop within historic Jeddah which highlights the manufacture process of Roshan. And we can see extra propagation of Roshan all the way currently in al-Balad, which is coupled by propagation of the historic Jeddah's role in the building of the Saudi state. For example, the relation between Beit Nasif with Malik Abdulaziz. And however, which serves as a new layer of concern, is that by interviewing with some locals in Jeddah, which includes government officials, of course, they would say that the true focus currently in Jeddah is, instead of being this Jeddah Historic District Program, is actually the Central Jeddah Program, which is designed to create the new neighborhoods and the new living environment for the relatively affluent Saudis and perhaps for the affluent foreigners that come to Saudi Arabia. And therefore, it may still demonstrate a downplay of the indigenous Hijazi culture within Saudi Arabia, while Hijazi culture remains a cultural other within Saudi Arabia. And a comparison between Ad-Dir'iyya and Balad would also suggest this point, because Ad-Dir'iyya serves as a central point for the Saudi national narrative by propagating the centrality of the Saudi family and of course, the Saudi family's role in building a kingdom out of the Arabian Peninsula. And therefore, when it comes to the main findings, it's actually that I argue that there is a belated nation building within Saudi Arabia in which al-Balad is reinterpreted. And there is a disjointment not only between the deterioration of al-Balad and its conservation, but also between Saudi state building and Saudi nation building, which Saudi state building came first with a significant lag of Saudi nation building. And therefore, in the new nation building process, al-Balad is reinterpreted and incorporated into this general framework. So, as I come to conclusion, is this Saudi search for identity is to selectively deploy characteristics of al-Balad with its plasticity generated by the state building process and its damage caused to the old historic town, and the disynchrony of state building and the nation building process, and maybe the future implication for future research is that the urban transformation of al-Balad is also in a way demonstrated the dynamic between state building and nation building processes in Saudi Arabia, which the latter, it has come to be the focal point of the current rulers of Saudi Arabia, with its focus remain on the centrality of the Saudi family. And I conclude here, and shukran jazilan ala husni istima'in.
Thank you very much, researcher Rafael Lee, for adhering to time, observing time. We have started a bit late, so because of the constraint of time, I would like to accommodate for a large number of questions. So I will give 1 minute for each person, please. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Saad. My name is Zaid Al Fadil. I'm originally from Jeddah. I'm very pleased that Jeddah is present in the discussions of two elite presenter, Dr. Said, and I'd like to say that Jeddah is the only city in the Arab region that an encyclopedia has been developed, and I was part of this scientific team who were behind this encyclopedia. 34 researchers took part with this encyclopedia in 8 parts, and it has and one of these volume or two of these volumes, I was the author of these 2 volumes. The one of focuses on the cultural background of Jeddah from the emergence of Islam till current days. It is the only encyclopedia that focuses on Jeddah at large. There are other encyclopedias that focuses on the minarets or other cultural or traditional components. I implore the researchers to focus on the new research. Before 1900 is totally different from prior and post, as we can say, AD and BC. So the development that Jeddah has witnessed complements or development in Riyadh and other cities. It is not attributed to economic factors, but rather it is related to the circumstances of the new millennia, the new vision of the country. The urban identity is no longer exist, unfortunately. Please be brief. The dilemma of Jeddah, when it was rejected, it was presented as the port of Mecca. So the community, when they came and checked the place, the port is no longer exist. So the researchers stated their comments. Jeddah has been for so long known as the port of Mecca, and Uthman bin Affan, the Khalifa, the third Caliph, who promoted Jeddah as the port of Mecca. The final point concerning Bahrain, from what I understood from Dr. Al-Anud, Al-Bahrain, and when you go back to the history of Bahrain, my study in the master was on Delman civilization. It is a great history. However, unfortunately, Bahrain is an island, cannot be expanded to cover the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. Thank you very much, Dr. Saad. I have a comment, not a question. Mr. Lee speaks about Al Balad. So this term came from Egypt, and the Levant. And the Gulf area, we say Dir, the neighborhood or the downtown of the city. In Bahrain, they say the market. Also in Qatar, when they speak about the downtown. So the term itself, al-balad, I think it is imported from the Levant and has been established to. My second comment is about the first presentation. You have mentioned a point that is common in all Arab countries. People migrating from the downtown to the suburb, and this is what this way that people have left the downtown because it is not a total migration, meaning they still have roots and there are linkages. And the locals do go back to the downtown, especially during Ramadan, and there is these religious events. So they return back to the downtown at the on the weekends. In Oman, there is the Lawati wall. The downtown is totally. So they only in Ramadan they return back to the downtown and they celebrate the religious activities. So my question to Dr. Al Anud, it is very much related. The role of museums in reshaping the national identity, in my opinion, I think this is a new variable. There are other variables that related to the tribe, to the religious, to the ethnic groups who do play a fundamental role in reshaping the national identity, and not only the museums. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Dr. Saad, and thanks. The thanks goes to the panelists. I have a comment actually from the reference of Al Anud when she spoke about the variables and the Saudi identity by highlighting or the political and cultural factors and trying to minimize the religious factor. And I think this is not new. It has been deep rooted in reshaping the national identity of Saudi Arabia, and I believe that religion was smartly used by the rulers of Saudi Arabia. So especially during the Ikhwan, the Islamic Brotherhood, the old Islamic Brotherhood in the history. So they took advantage of these to establish their roles. So the project will not succeed without this religious banner. However, Saudi Arabia was not named the Islamic Saudi Kingdom. It was named the Arab Saudi Kingdom, and this. Based on the traditions, the name of Saudi Arabia should have been the Islamic Saudi Kingdom. So I do not agree that a new variables have been established. Yes, the religious factor or variable has concluded its role, and now it is time to maybe marginalize the religious variable. My final point is I think the museums is a mirror that reflects the city or the country, and it is not. It just reflects what has the country has gone through in development and advancements. Yes, there are other factors like the architecture, but we cannot say that museums were fundamental in establishing the identity. I have just one short comment. Dar'iyya, yes, indeed, it was. It was a small city because it was a ruin. It was damaged. It was an open museum, indeed, yes. And Al Ula is similarly because in the 80s, the people were moved to Al Ula for different reasons. However, Jeddah now became an open museum because people, the question is could be raised if these open museums does this reflect the tradition or the of the country? Maybe the UNESCO, when they rejected the Jeddah portfolio, because they want a vibrant urban areas, not only vacant areas. So we need to take this into account, and I don't have an answer to. Thank you very much. Please introduce yourself. Good afternoon. Peace be upon you. Aisha Al-Kawari. On their side, would like to thank you for this very important, very vibrant discussion. Dr. Anoud, when she spoke about the role of museums in creating the national narratives, my question, how can we balance between establishing and promoting the national identity as well as a mean that reflects the cultural and social development and changes and if the museums have a role in inciting the tension, the ethnic and sectarian tensions in certain countries. I have the same question that Dr. Freitag mentioned because I noticed that in each era in the Gulf, does not build on each. It's not the everything is demolished and a new identity is being built, and this is not linked to Saudi Arabia per se, but rather in UAE. There are inclination to return back to the historical cities. Unfortunately, now they are demolishing the areas that was built in the 80s and 90s and going back to the traditional cities, and I think will affect the balance. Unfortunately, the new establishments of traditional cities are seems manufactured, not genuine. We take into account that the Indians constitute the largest percentage of expats who live so they are more, they can absorb change very strongly. So they stay irrespective of the changes that takes place, especially the neighborhoods where these expats lives. They are still vibrant with and those and it just reflect the old nature of the city. Adariya is being presented as a new form of identity in Saudi Arabia. However, I think this contradicts the past identity, especially Saudi Arabia was known as an Islamic country. And Mustafa bin Hamoush from Algeria. I am architecture and a lecturer. I go back to the term, the identity, Orlik who, and Al Anud, because it is central in both presentations. This concept is just jelly like as an architect. If this term should have a materialistic nature and not just an emotional link between for the people. My second question, Al Anud. Identity is not. It is of different levels. We have expanded identity and more narrow identity, identity of the neighborhood, the identity of the city or the nation. So I think these different levels of identities do complement each other, do not contradict. And my question, if there are contradictions between the two types of identities.
My name is Abdul Raouf. Dr. Anoud, you talked about the recession of the religious component in the Saudi identity, and Dr. Hassan explained that the uh, Islam was used at some point intelligently, and right now it is being excluded, to use your words. So, in truth, this idea confused me a bit. Is Islam not intervening in formulating the Saudi identity? And is it just because it's called the Kingdom Saudi Arabia, regardless of the fact that the flag of Saudi Arabia says there's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger, and the king is called the guardian of the two mosques. So, if we are to assume that the role of religion is taking a step back from the Saudi identity and the Gulf identity, then why are we talking about identity here? Then we should talk about something else. Okay, the last question, because we only have 5 minutes left that we will be distributing among the speakers. Go ahead. Peace and God's blessings be upon you. First, thank you for the nice efforts. Thank you for the really rich presentation. Rawan Saadeddin, founder and CEO of Habab of Excellence for Training and Consultancy. So, based on my experience working in NIOM and Al Ula, my question is to Dr. Anoud. Dr. Anoud, الدرعية was listed to the UNESCO list in 2010, but the efforts that you mentioned started in 2017. My question is, why this time discrepancy, or this gap in time, be it in Diriyah, Al Ula, Neom, or other cities? Why this gap in time between the efforts and the enlistment in UNESCO? Thank you. Before we go to our speakers, I have a note from the management of the forum saying that the sessions of the path of the Gulf City will be moving to the main auditorium after the lunch break. So let's start the other way around this time. If you would like to comment about on the questions that were asked, if you would like to respond to some of the questions that were asked. We have Dr. Zaid Al Fadil, for example, mentioned some points. Do you have any remarks? If you don't have any, you don't have to speak. Perhaps I will be speaking English. You can do that. That's fine.
Regarding the, maybe I'll just add some comments for
Yeah.
my presentation in relation with the some of the questions asked, which is also falls into my area of concern. I think so. I remember one of the professors mentioned the museum as mirror, and while it may be its role as an actor may be under discussion, but here I quote the work of Rosie Bashir, who worked on the what she called archive war, and we shall see that museum has its function, like while the exact extent might be under discussion, it will be able to act back on the residents of on the nation's citizens, while museum itself is also a kind of branding. We shall see it also as a kind of branding, like promoting a certain facet or a certain perspective of a certain state or the Saudi nation. And it will be able to act back on its citizens. For example, when I think most, when I was in Diriyah personally, we can see inside the Museum of Saudi Family History, which has extensive coverage inside the whole of Diriyah. And I think it has its function on acting back, on not only as presenting, not only as presenting a kind of a selective reality, which we cannot deny Saudi the central role of Al Saud, but also it can act back, while it propagate a certain fact and to plant or to inculcate within Saudi society as well as all those foreign visitors. This is my comment.
شكرا.
Let's go to Dr. Anoud. Go ahead in the name of Allah most merciful. Thank you very much. So the questions are a bit similar, so I'll give a general response. For museums, in reality, museums are spaces that reflect the ideology of the state and are able to influence the national identity by documenting the desired narratives or the depicted narratives, the narratives desired by the state and promoted by the state. As for Diriyah, in my paper, I do not say that religion is no longer present in this narrative, but I say that religion is not exclusively the narrative. So the transformation does not reflect staying far away from the religion, but reflects a new narrative that focuses on the rich history and the diverse identity and modernity, and a step to promote the identity of the state as a moderately Islamic state and oppressing the extremist ideology that used to be the rule in life. So it's like a step away from Wahhabism and the old narrative related to that. And we see post 2019, after the revival of the Diriyah started, there was an emergence of a new national day, which is the 22nd of February, the day of the establishment of the state. But it did not annul the national day. It is only a reformulation of the narrative and a recorrection that Saudi Arabia desires, that Wahhabism in the old narrative is no longer central in this narrative, and It is going back to the nation state, away from belonging to the Islamic universality. Also, the role of Mohammed bin Saud was more than just the alliance at the time, but also showing his style in building the state and the cultural aspects and the consolidation of the Hajj route and the economic aspects. So, in this narrative, we go back to the establishment, the foundation of the state. It gives it more time as, and if we see the National Museum, as I said, first it focused on the religious identity, and then it moved on to the modern state during the reign of King Abdulaziz. So we did not have that narrative going back to the nation state and going back to the foundation role of the Saudi state. I believe I answered some questions. That's nice. And I would like to note the issue today. Saudi Arabia always says the day, the national day, not Eid, because Eid is an occasion in Islam. This is different in Saudi Arabia compared to other states in the Arab world. There is a question that I would like to answer. Uh, for the question of Ms. Rawan, when she talked about the discrepancy, if I go back to the phases of Ad-Dir'iyya, we see that the first phase was realization of the importance of the site, which was 1973, when a royal decree was issued to preserve the historic site, the heritage site. And this was early efforts, national efforts to preserve it and protect it, but there was no real trend actually, and I can call it the Najdi phase. The second phase was the universal transformation or global transformation, if I could say that, after the year 2000. In that time, Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries actually sought to enlist their heritage locations in the UNESCO list, and Saudi Arabia was successful in 2010, as you said, Ms. Rawan. And the first phase paved the way for the second phase. And at that time, there was no clear vision. It is true that after Ad-Dir'iyya was enlisted in the UNESCO list, there was more interest. There were more tourists visiting the place and some citizens, but there was no revival process in place. The third phase was rebuilding the nation, the modern nation state. And in this era or in this time, as I mentioned in my paper, starting 2017, there was a perception and a real vision of the kingdom and its direction for the future, which is the Vision 2023. A nationwide project started where Dir'iyya was a cultural hub and a symbol that reflects the aspirations of the state towards its cultural heritage and turning it into a cultural institution and a brand that is promoted internationally. Dr. Ulrike? I believe most of the interventions were remarks rather than questions. But the questions related to identity and the definition of the identity. In my opinion, identity goes beyond the physical and architectural traits and goes into social aspects and principles. And this is why I talked about the relations between locals and norms and traditions. And if we are to talk about the identity of any city and its outskirts, especially here in the Gulf states, we can see that perhaps sometimes there is discrepancy between the identity in the city and the identity in the other areas, especially in Hijaz. There is a social media discussion about the Hijazi identity. Is it the identity of the city, or is it the identity of the tribes? And so this is an intense discussion, actually, that is still going, I believe, now on social media in Saudi Arabia. Thank you. Thank you all. What a nice and rich session. And here we conclude this session. Peace and God's mercy be upon you.